Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your host, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello.
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 Hello. Is it weird how much I love our opening music? Every time the music is playing, I'm just like
we dancing around
to myself, and I don't know.
I do like it. It's upbeat.
Yeah, that's why we chose it.
Yeah.
Hey.
Who doesn't love a good guitar? A good guitar riff, if that's the term. Anyway. Listeners, welcome back to another episode of Election University Podcast. I am your co-host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
And we are talking today about polling.
Polling.
The ever controversial topic of polling on campaigns. We are talking with Russ Swindell, who works at PPP, which is the public policy polling folks out in North Carolina. And we wanted to cover polling because obviously, we're left of center, and we care quite a bit about what's going to happen in the midterm elections this year. And we are very interested in hearing from polling experts and seeing what they're seeing or hearing about what they're seeing in the polling that they've done across the U.S. Yeah. And not only that, we want to know what can campaigns who don't have huge budgets to afford, your 20-minute, 400 sample size poll in, live calls and like doing the full meal deal. If you can't afford those kinds of polls, what can you do to still get some reliable research? Well, IVR polling seems to be the solution.
Well, and what I like about PPP is that they target folks with smaller budgets, and their whole mission is to provide polling services to folks who don't necessarily have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on such a thing. Although I'm sure they would take your money if you had that much.
Well, I think they do like a variety of different types of polling. But if you are one of those down ballot races that has a tight budget, we're going to talk to you about how you can use their services and how it can be cost effective for you as well. So Russ Swindell, who is a former chief of staff in the office of Congressman Bob Etheridge in North Carolina, is now one of the chief client strategists at PPP. So,
all right,
excited to chat with him about this and learn more about polling and what he's seeing in the blue wave. Russ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
In our intro, we gave a brief description of PPP, what it is, what it does, but we'd love to know a little bit more about you and the work and the origin story of PPP.
Oh, sure. Well, my own origin story, I'm a North Carolina native, born and raised, and got involved in politics because my family was involved in politics. Really, we were active even when I was young. Having graduated college, and even while I was in college, worked with the North Carolina legislature for a while, and then went on to manage my first state Senate race. And then after that, cycles after that, managed congressional races and wound up being a chief of staff to a member of Congress. That phase of my career went on for about 20 years. And then I went to work for some nonprofits doing sort of political consulting work and also doing independent expenditure work in races, both state legislative races in North Carolina as well as local government races. And it was through all of those experiences in politics that I kind of came in contact with public policy polling, which is we are a North Carolina-based pollster. We're based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we were founded and started by a Democratic donor who saw candidates and causes that he had been contributing to and supporting, either paying too much money for simple, for answers to simple questions, or worse, they were sort of conducting business without doing any kind of polling at all and sort of flying blind. And so Dean said, I think that there's tools out there that we can start a polling company that uses the most cost-effective research methods to put information in the hands of the people who need it and the candidates and causes that I care about. And so that was sort of how PPP was born. And it was through a lot of the work here in North Carolina that I became very familiar with them and used them in races and situations where, it made sense. And so that's sort of my backstory and also sort of bits and pieces of the backstory of PPP. And we're, of course, now a national polling firm. We work all over the country, and I feel very blessed to live here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and still get to carry on that work.
That's great. So what are the races that PPP has worked on historically? Like where would our listeners identify some of the races where you've done polling?
Yeah, I mean, literally all over the country. We do work in every state in the country, minus work in states like North Dakota, Indiana, and Nebraska, which have fairly restrictive laws against automated surveys, which we'll get into in a little bit, and just sort of restrictive laws against surveys and polling in general. But so we do work all over the country. We do work with groups from issue groups and national labor groups through like congressional candidates, U.S. Senate candidates, gubernatorial candidates, independent expenditure groups around the country, and a whole host of state legislative and sort of county level, city level races as well.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on order. I mean, we do anywhere between somewhere around like probably 700 to this year we'll probably end up doing in the neighborhood of like 1,200 polls. So, I mean,
wow,
we're pretty prolific in terms of the number of polls we do and the number of people that we help.
How many people do you need on staff to do that many polls? That sounds like an incredible amount of work.
Yeah, it is. We have 6 PPP staffers, excluding me, that are in charge of setting up polls and working with clients and getting polls in the field. And then we of course have our IT team and our finance team and those kind of people too. But the nuts and bolts of putting these polls together, getting them in the field, making sure they're run correctly, crunching the numbers, getting the information back to the clients is a team of 6 people that do that work.
660, did you say? 60?
6.
6.
Oh, 6. I thought I heard 60. I was like, wow, that's a lot of people. 6 people. 6 people handling the implementation of 700 polls?
1,200.
Yeah.
How am I hearing these numbers wrong? I thought I heard 700.
They were doing 700. This year they've got 12.
Oh, they were doing 700. Okay, got it. Wow, I need more coffee, clearly.
This is the big busy year. Yeah.
Yeah. Doubt. Okay, so what is the lowest, most down ballot race that you have done polling for?
Oh my gosh, that is a terrific question. And on average, you're probably talking city council races. But I am quite certain that we have done some other, whether it be like a soil and water race or something like that. We've probably done that too. But, city council type races tend to be the ones that, I would say are sort of the size rates where, polling still makes sense, right? I mean,
right.
You sometimes what you'll find is, number one, the geographies aren't big enough to poll in, or just not enough people there. Or then two, the candidates' budgets don't really warrant doing this kind of research. So those are the considerations. But I would say on average, like a city council race is probably the standard sort of smallest race that we work in.
Can you talk a little bit about why the number of people if a city's not large enough, it's not worth it to do a poll, and about like sample size and why that's important, and then also a little bit about the cost that goes into it, so why it wouldn't be worth someone to do polling?
Yeah, totally. I mean, unfortunately, one of the realities that the polling industry has gone through over the last, let's say 30 years is that response rates have continued to fall, right? So people are less inclined to take surveys, which translates into two things for
And this
clients.
is because you're calling them, right? Is it because people aren't picking up their phones?
Well, I mean, it could be for any number of reasons. People are out more, they're more mobile, they are maybe less inclined to give up information and take surveys. But for whatever those reasons, those response rates have been falling over the last decade. So the geographies that are needed to get, good sample sizes of, say, 400 samples or 500 respondents in a sample size require, maybe 30,000 phone numbers or 20,000 phone numbers for us to be able to utilize. And so if you're in an area, if you're in a district that's smaller than that, you only got 5,000 or 10,000 voters, this is probably not enough people there to give us a good sample, which means that your margins of error are going to be on the order of who knows what. I mean, if it's only 100 or 150 samples that was responses that we got back, it might be 8 or 10 points in terms of a margin of error, which it's going to be useful for maybe figuring out some things, but probably a lot less useful for really dialing in on messaging and other things. So I mean, that's a reality. And then the other reality is that when you have so many people who are declining these surveys, sometimes we're having to use different kinds of modes to reach them, even in some of those trickier districts. So maybe there's 20 or 30,000 people living there. It just increases the cost of these surveys for the client. And of course, our company's goal is to keep those costs down for our clients. So we want to really focus on how we can do it as affordably and accurately as possible, and so get you the information you need.
Cool.
Wow. So in 2016, polling got kind of a bad rap. Didn't quite hit the mark on some of the tracking that it did. But overall, PPP gets very good scores when analyzed by folks like Nate Silver's, 538. I can't remember where else I read that you got very good scores. Was it Politico maybe, who did an analysis of polling, gave you some good scores on the accuracy of your polls and how many races that you accurately predicted over the last few cycles. Why do you think polling got a bad rap in 2016, and what has changed since then to maybe avoid some of the criticism that happened in 2016?
I think politics in general got a bad rap in 2016.
That's fair. Good point. Touche.
But yeah, I think that, where the polls got it wrong, we're really looking at who were the voters that we were all predicting were going to turn out, right? And so, in some respects, as pollsters and others were drawing samples and doing their sampling and their weighting, they just did not predict as many Trump voters to, be out there as there were. And I think that, historically, I know in our own firm, as we've looked at sort of weighting schemes and things like that you want to apply in different elections, it was outside the margin of what we had seen in terms of sort of a normal range. And so that led, I think, a lot to what pollsters were seeing and how accurate people were at predicting things. I will say that one of the things that we did, and we kind of got it right, was that we did see in down ballot races in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, we saw, in districts that, were maybe, plus 10 Clinton districts, where things were really, really tight. And those were some of the sort of the canaries in the coal mine that we started seeing 2 weeks out going, we feel like there's some problems out here, and started trying to send up some of those signals. But that was the reality of it. Now, things I think have changed a little bit. I know in our own company, as we've adjusted to sort of that thinking, now we're seeing a cycle 2018 come up where, maybe there were these sleeper Republicans that sort of came out in 2016 that we weren't accounting for. We know from all of the special elections in the country in the last year that there are a lot of Democrats that have not participated in midterm elections that are showing up. And I guess it was just past week with like Paul Ryan's district, where more Democrats showed up to vote in the Democratic primary than Republicans showed up to vote in the Republican primary in a district like Paul Ryan. So with that kind of added enthusiasm, I mean, one thing we're doing different is going ahead and include, not applying sort of what we would normally apply in terms of a mid-year or a mid-cycle screen on those voters, looking for voters who typically show up in midterms. Instead, we're pulling the whole universe and then asking them the question on how likely they are to vote.
Yeah. I think I can't remember who it was, Emerson or someone did a poll recently, and they had 3 different turnout models. It was like standard, midterm election, presidential level election, and then blue surge turnout model. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to not only kind of cover your bases and like make sure that you're not missing any turnout, but also to maybe more accurately reflect the range, the swing that could possibly happen and maybe catch people off guard. Is that sort of what you're talking about as well? Is trying to control for some of that, what is very hard to define, which is the turnout model this year?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to want your pollster to give you the best read on where you're at in the election, right? Where things are in the cycle. But I think also having a couple of different views on, well, what if the Democrats actually don't come out? Or, what if everybody does show up? Like, what's the range of what we're thinking in terms of, how bad could it be or how good could it be? I think those are good questions to ask, and those are probably good analyses to do.
Does that effectively constitute like 3 different polls then? So if I'm a client and I need to pay for some polling, is having those comparative ones like I'm doubling or tripling my budget for polling?
I don't think we're thinking about doubling or tripling it. I mean, what we've done, right, is number one, just look at the number of people who have answered the survey and sort of where the normal sort of weights and measures are in terms of the population of people who respond to the poll, where that is. But then maybe looking at a cross-tab question of, enthusiasm, how excited are you to get out there and vote? And so just, I think by looking in that one cross-tab, you can see that there's a jump. A lot of times we're seeing, districts where maybe a Democrat is right now up 1 or up 2, but when you look at the enthusiasm of Democrats who say they're excited to go vote, and you look at that number, then all of a sudden they're up 10.
So it's just different ways to analyze the same universe of respondents.
Yeah, weighting it differently.
Yeah, you just want to make sure I think you're asking some of the right questions in there, like an enthusiasm question or something else, that you can then cross tab and sort of tease that out.
Got it.
So what is IVR polling? You guys do IVR polling. For our listeners who don't know what that is, who may have received, I guess a regular live call, but maybe not an IVR call. What is the difference between the two of them, and why is that better or different than a live call?
Yeah, I'm going to guess that most of your listeners don't know what IVR is.
Yeah, I have no idea what we're talking about right now.
Don't know what IVR is. But IVR stands for Integrated Voice Response. But we all know that as either automated polling or robo-polling. It's basically any survey that's been recorded and then is delivered to a landline phone via a recorded message in which you punch buttons on your phone to indicate your response. That was sort of PPP. State-of-the-art technology back in 2001 when we were founded. But it's still the backbone of what we do. And even now with the rise of cell phones, there's still better than half the population still has landlines, and you're still able to get in most districts really good samples of those landline users, and so that's sort of what we do with our IVR stuff. We also at PPP has been changing. This is a changing industry, so we use mixed mode now. So when clients want to make sure we're not missing cell phone only users, we will go the most expensive route of calling them and giving them their survey, or in surveys where it's applicable, something that's statewide is where we found the best application. We'll use online panels, and those are people who have previously said that they would take a survey, and then they're identified as being cell phone only users. This is the subset we want, and then we'll deliver the same surveys that we'll deliver to our landlines. We'll deliver to those online panels as well, and then we'll blend those results back together. So we'll maybe do like a 20% sample from cell phones. So we make sure that we're not missing something.
Are there universally different rules for cell phones than there are for landlines, or does that vary state by state, or is it maybe both?
Yeah, that's a FCC ruling on landlines and cell phones. So the cell phones cannot be contacted by automated methods unless you are like someone who Congress has made an exception for, which there are some businesses out there, financial, like credit card companies and people selling you some kinds of insurance and warranty plans and things like that can still do robocalls to your home, but you cannot, as survey research methods, you cannot use automated polling or automated delivery systems. Like politicians can use automated delivery systems to deliver like a robo message. Mm-hmm. If you're signed up on a list, like maybe a club, a school, a church, or something like that, they can get out, automated messages through those kinds of methods as well. But
you have to opt in, is what you're saying.
The Telephone Protection Consumer Protection Act guards against the use of that. We at PPP, our founder Gene Devman is actually on a lawsuit to challenge that because Congress has made so many exceptions to the law that we now feel like it's a free speech right that they can't just say, oh, you can't do this unless you're this person, or this person. They've made so many exceptions that I think they've infringed on everybody else's free speech. So
yeah,
we'll
I feel like
that goes anywhere.
I have been getting a ton of robocalls lately on my cell phone. Yeah. So that's why I was like,
are you going to file an amicus brief against this case? You should.
I don't ever listen long enough to know who it is, though. I'm just like, click.
So for folks who maybe don't understand the polling nitty gritty a little bit, if I can dive into it a little bit with you, if that's okay. Cell phone only users are different than landline users because X. Why do you care about making sure that landline versus cell phone has a healthy mix in your sample size?
Sure. Well, I mean, demographically speaking, younger people, oftentimes people who tend to be in more urban areas, tend to be cell phone only users. So as you draw samples and as you're looking for election results that matter, especially for polling results that matter to winning elections or beating back on issues, we got to have sort of a good view of everybody. So that's why there's the need to both think about both modes as you're thinking about your survey design.
So the theory then would be that landline only young people or landline only city residents are underrepresented in a sample. That's why you need more of them. Is that right? You wouldn't have enough of them out there to try to scoop into a sample size. So therefore,
that's right. That's why you need that mixed mode. Yeah, you need the two modes. Since it just skews. Landlines tend to skew older. Cell phones tend to skew younger.
Right, and I have found, like in the last couple of election cycles, if someone received polling information that skewed maybe more conservatively than they had hoped that the polling results would, their first claim is an underrepresentation of cell phone only users. My understanding now is that pollsters pretty much across the board have already compensated for that maybe they were a little slow to include them in all of their samples, but now that is just an industry norm, right? That accusation doesn't hold water.
Yeah, I think that's right. And certainly when we do polls for our customers that are the straight up IVR polls to landline only, we oftentimes use, appropriate weighting schemes that compensate for that so that we still have a good read on where the population is.
Yeah. Cool.
Interesting.
Okay. So let's talk about what you're seeing. You're doing 1,200 polls across the United States. What are you seeing? Generally speaking, are you seeing a blue wave? Is it a trickle? Is it a steady stream with soothing sounds? Is it a tsunami? Tell us what you're seeing.
I keep asking this question every week, every Monday. I'm like, all right, Tom Jensen is our director of polling. I'm like, all right, Tom, has anything changed? Because the question I have, I know there's a blue wave out there. The question is, has it crested? Right? Is it going to crash before Election Day, or are we gonna have this thing crest on Election Day? What we've seen so far is no change. For the last 18 months, as we've been doing polls and we've been asking sort of the standard sort of, Trump favorability or generic ballot, generic congressional ballot, those kinds of questions, we've seen no change. The sort of 8 to 10 point margin that has sort of been there for the last 18 months is still there this week. So I believe that the blue wave is still there. The Democratic enthusiasm is still there. We're still seeing Democrats being, 10 to 15 points more excited about going to vote than Republicans in this election cycle. And the other thing that I keep worrying about is from the Democratic side is, what's the issue environment going to be like in 2 months? Are things going to somehow or another change in a way that, gravity takes back over and sort of the blue wave starts to go away and that sort of thing. And so you think about, are issues like the economy or terrorism or, foreign policy, are those kind of things going to weigh in? But consistently what we see and what we have seen is that, voters want to check on Trump, and the issue that they are most concerned about is healthcare. And I think if those two issues continue to win the day and Democratic enthusiasm stays high, I think the blue wave is, still going to be there in 2-3 months, just like it is right now. Or I guess it's 2 months now, or 60 days out, right?
Oh God,
it's like 80 days out. It was like, but knocking on all the wood here.
So my sense of this is that as we get closer to the election, our folks on the left of center side become more aware of the election. The summer is a bit of a hard time to get Democrats to pay attention to elections, and that as we get closer, there's more awareness of what's going on. Do you see that is holding true, or do you think Democrats are like really aware and there's not going to be like, let's just use Washington State as an example. We just had our primary a couple of weeks ago. We did very, very well, surprisingly well.
Yes, we did.
And I think we had thought that there was going to be some good news, but it was like great news.
Unexpected.
And we weren't expecting as much of a swing as there was. And that's during the summer when we have like our turnouts in our primary are abysmal, and we expect an increase in performance on top of an already excellent increase. Do you think that is still holding true, or do you think the engagement is sort of where it is right now and shall remain constant? Maybe this is hard to predict, but given, what historically about Democratic turnout post summer, what are you seeing?
Well, look, I mean, if it's where it is right now and it doesn't get any better, that's still historic, right? Yeah. I mean, midterms are generally not good for Democratic turnout to begin with. And I think there's going to be, a host of other issues that'll still play in that are, locally affected in a lot of these races around the country, leading U.S. Senate races or gubernatorial races, or in places like North Carolina where there's a lack of both of those things. Will certainly weigh in on who turns out for the election and how many, electoral messages are out there before people go vote. So the cues that, people tend to need to know that there's an election coming up, and, I got to get that done next Tuesday. So, I think that really remains to be seen, but I mean, I feel pretty good right now about where Democrats are in terms of their level of enthusiasm, the work that I see going on, the excitement that's out there, the fundraising that's going on. I mean, all those I think are great signs. Yeah.
So let's talk about down ballot races. There are 40 46, I've lost track now, Democratic seats that have flipped from Republican to Democrat on a legislative or local level that were partisan. Have you been involved in any of those high-profile Democratic flips on a legislative level that you can talk about, I should say, that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I wish I had a list in front of me. We've been involved in so many of those this cycle. It's felt really good to be involved with them. But specifically, I'd probably kick that one off to somebody else on our team that is more actively involved in individual clients. I'm sure they've got some great stories to tell. Yeah,
I guess where I was going with it is we've done a few episodes now about winning and running in red areas and appropriately calibrating the level of hope that you can have going into a Trump +7 or +10 or +20 district, and really being able to calibrate your expectations on how you can go. And you have some very extreme examples, like the race in Wisconsin that flipped was remarkable. And then other ones that were nail biters that you thought, well, God, there's been worse districts that flipped. And like John Ossoff, for example, right. Did worse, than Connor Lamb did. Right. So you have some of these examples, and it's hard to, I think, predict the dynamics, and the candidates are so different. But if you're seeing stuff in red districts that give folks hope,
without a doubt. I mean, two of them come to mind just from a couple of weeks ago. I mean, we had the Ohio district that the Democrats nearly lost by a point. I mean, TPP was, I think, the first pollster to poll that district and show that it was indeed viable for a Democrat to potentially win there, which helped drive a lot of national money into the race. Similarly, we did some work, I think, for the ACLU in Missouri on the DA's race that the Democrats were able to pick off there from the Ferguson, the DA in the Ferguson area. So, I mean, those are two examples that come to my mind that were very recent that we were involved with, where we were fortunate to be hired to do those kinds of polls for people and show that indeed there was promise in these races that people would get involved in and get excited about them.
All right, so let's talk budgets. What does a poll cost, generally speaking, for folks who have no idea what this world is like? Your polling is obviously going to be significantly cheaper than a live call that is way more labor intensive. But what sort of cost are we looking at for campaigns? Yeah, so it can run the gambit, right, from really expensive polls on U.S. Senate races where you may be looking at $50,000-$60,000 plus with different pollsters, to what we do at PPP at $2,500. And so the variables you're going to look at are, number one, the mode. We're cheaper because, like we've discussed on this call, we use automated polling methods. So a $2,500 PPP poll is 5 questions, 4 demographics, and a target sample size of 400 to 500 given the district. So beyond that, when you start using live dial pollsters, a similar live dial pollster project may come in the range of around 10 to 15,000, depending on the pollster. It could be a little bit more. And then increasingly now we have folks who are using other modes to collect survey research. There's folks who are using online surveys, using Facebook surveys, text messages to collect survey data. I've seen those range anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 in the cost of some of those kinds of surveys. And then the other research tool that you see people utilize a lot are focus groups, which have sort of a different use, but are still really important for especially larger campaigns to do. And a typical focus group may cost you $20,000 to sit down and talk to 1 or 2 groups of people. So those are some of the research methods that are out there and sort of the varying costs. Yeah.
Well, is there, if you can't afford a big poll like that or to do a focus group, I've heard of maybe just like issue areas, buying buying questions on someone else's poll? Is that a thing that people can do? Is that smart for candidates to do?
I think it depends on what's going on there. I mean, if you're, let's say it's a statewide poll, maybe, and there are several constitutional officers that are all running on a statewide poll. For everybody to share the cost of that poll seems to me to make a lot of sense. Maybe that's a way to get after it, but you're going to just want to be careful on sort of the different districts that are there and what you're polling and whether districts are similar or not. We've seen folks who have, tried sort of ganging districts together, and then, everybody does their own poll. I think the only thing you have to really be careful about is if one district is demographically very different than the others.
Right.
You're going to want to be careful about drawing too many assumptions from the poll that will relate to each of the 2 or 3 or 4 districts. But some states have like state Senate races where House districts are nested inside the state Senate district. So that's oftentimes a good way to, your sample sizes. You could even try to bump up your sample sizes a little bit in the House district to get good, reliable samples there. But a way to maybe have 2 or 3 people, run one poll and achieve some efficiencies there.
Okay, so is $2,500 your base poll? That's your entry level poll for a down ballot campaign, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we would consider that sort of, what most people use to either just check the temperature of an issue or to see where they stand in a race, sort of a tracking poll. Or a lot of issue groups and caucus operations may use those kind of polls to sort of triage a number of races where they want to figure out, 10 or 15, 20 races that are going on, what are the 5 that we're going to invest in? That kind of a poll is usually really good for figuring out which one, needs the most investment.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say I'm a campaign and I've got some reasonable resources. Let's say I've got $20,000 to $25,000 that I'm raising. And it's important for me, either this is a crowded race or I'm unknown, or I just am not sure I want to run this race. And so I want to invest some money. Let's say I've got $2,500 to spend. I'm going to take 10% of my budget to do this. It's a worthwhile investment. And I approach you on doing a sample. I'm assuming that's your 400 size sample or maybe 300 size sample for a $2,500 poll.
Yeah, we would hope to get 400. Sure. 400.
So the margin of error is plus or minus, I can't remember what it is for 400, 5 points or so, 4.9.
Yep.
Yeah. So you have a pretty decent margin of error. That should give me a really good temperature check of where the voters are in this particular area. What questions should I be thinking about? Do you provide the questions? Do the candidates come with their own questions? You help craft the survey. Walk us through that process.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in every way you can imagine. We oftentimes work with political consultants who the candidates are working with. In those type situations, a lot of the times the political consultants have been through this process several times, and they know what they want to ask, right? So, they'll send us a survey that's probably 80% done. And then we'll work with some candidates who just say, like you said, I'm trying to figure out whether or not I really want to run, whether it's viable or not. And we'll talk to them about, dynamics of the race, issues that are important in the race, maybe some things about them, some things about their opponents. And we'll figure out, what are the things that they need to be polling, and we'll help them craft a survey. And, they'll have time to review it and sign off on it and everything else, but we'll do almost 100% of the writing of the survey. So it goes both ways. We help people through either side of that, which I think is another great reason to use PPP, because we do have professionals around here who are skilled at survey design and also skilled at automated survey design and structuring surveys. So, we're asking questions in the right order and, hopefully keeping people on the phone and getting better response rates, those kind of things.
So a $2,500 survey, 400 sample size-ish, you're helping craft the survey. It's going to get 5 questions. 4 of them are demographic, right? So are you likely to vote in this, or are you a registered voter? are you likely to vote in this election? Some demographic information maybe on gender and income. Is that where you're going with some of the demographic information? And then,
yeah, we would generally do gender, race, age, and party ID.
And then you're going to get one head-to-head question on there.
You get five outside of that. The
five outside of that.
Is included.
Okay, got it.
The 4 demographics there are included. So then the 5 questions might be, how likely are you to vote? Maybe who'd you vote for in the last election for mayor? How familiar are you with these 3 candidates? How concerned are you about, potholes? Those kind of things.
Well, this is very affordable option. There used to be a firm called Precision Polling. I'm not sure if they were on your radar, where it was more of a do-it-yourself. You could upload your own list. You could develop your own survey. You'd record your own questions. They were bought out by SurveyMonkey, and then they promptly shut the whole thing down. So there hasn't been a very easy, low-cost, similar option that has the reputation, say, that you have acquired over the years. So this is a great option for down-ballot campaigns should you have the budget, at least a minimum budget that can cover some of this. But if you're going to polling, you should spend the resources on something like this.
Yeah, and again, you're working with skilled survey designers. You're working with tactical people who have been in politics and are tactical politicians, and you're also working with pollsters like Tom Jensen, who has crunched literally thousands and thousands and thousands of survey numbers across the country. So you get the benefit of all that instead of just trying to figure out how to do it yourself.
Yeah, so that's great. Okay, so I want to be respectful of your time. We're running a little over, and I'm so sorry about that. But I want to ask you one final question. So if the campaign does not have the resources to afford this, right, or they just can't kind of get beyond their own prejudices about polling and the errors that they think exist in polling, what should folks do to get their own idea of where the voters are?
Yeah, it's a great question. Get out of the bubble. That is probably, the number one criticism you have of candidates when you talk to them, right? You start talking to a candidate about how the race is going, and they're telling you, oh, it's going great. I've got all these, Republicans who are supporting me. And I'm like, well, that's great that you have a network of Republicans that are supporting you, but what about the other, 40% of Republicans in the district? Like, what are they thinking?
Right.
I think getting outside the bubble, getting outside of sort of standard party events and social events and things like that, where you're seeing sort of the same groups of people and talking to voters, whether that means, going to the Walmart or, trying out a different coffee house or, just showing up at some different type event to get a better sense of, where people are, and make sure you are asking people what they care about. I think that's the key one too. Don't just show up and talk, but show up and listen. Yeah,
that's amazing. Where can folks sign up for PPP? Where can they get more information about your services? Do you have some contact information that you're willing to share? Let us put that in the...
Sure. Go to the website, publicpolicypolling.com. Send us an email at, information at publicpolicypolling.com. That's where you can find us and find out lots more about the company and the surveys that we do. We also, PPP does a lot of public polling. From time to time, we'll put all that up on the website as well. So if you want to get a pulse of where things are, you can sign up there. And we have a newsletter list that when we have sort of breaking polling information and political insights to share, we get that out on a newsletter, so you can sign up for that too.
Yeah, your news section is awesome. I spent some time on there in preparation for this interview, and there's so much information about particularly where people are right now and the races, the big sexy races that we've just been watching. There's a lot of great information on there. So we'll include all of that in the show notes as well.
That's great. Well,
awesome.
Thank you. This has been fun. I'm glad that we went over and it didn't just end quickly. So, good time.
Timer, you're cut off.
And we don't do that for sure, especially when we're in a groove. That's not our style. Russ, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate this. This was great information. listeners for a low-cost polling option, check out PPP. We really, really appreciate the time today, Russ.
Sure thing.
Take care. Another big thank you to Russell Swindell of PPP for joining us today. We learned a lot about polling. So we are just saturated with polling information now.
I mean, not just polling information, but for me, it is really refreshing to know that polling can be something that is affordable. As in some of my nonprofit work, we look at like messaging polling and doing focus groups and things like that. And raising money for something like that is such a huge task and so out of reach for so many people. But the information is so useful and can help you on your campaign and let you know where you should be going and what you should be saying. And so the fact that you can get a pretty decent poll for like $2,500 is awesome.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And we know some of you out there are going, $2,500, that's like 50% of my budget, or, 25% of my budget, or I want to have a campaign manager and I can't do both. We understand that. We gave you some, reasonable tips, some tricks on research that you can use that's still helpful on your campaign. But for those campaigns that can raise that money and to just don't have the huge budget to do the live, full 20-minute poll, then this is a great option for you. And, they get high marks from various third-party folks that analyze the polling of this organization. They get a B+ and high ratings from Politico. So they're a great option, and Russell set you up.
Yeah.
One of him or 5 of his other colleagues will help you out there. So again, Russ, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time and your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Also, just some personal, thanks for the knowledge on the blue wave. And that we are not just living inside our little bubble of hope, that it might actually be happening. Yeah,
it feels good. It is helpful to see that, the polling indicates that nothing's changed and the energy has not dissipated. So keep it going, Democrats. Do not screw this up.
For 3 more months. You'll be okay.
Do not screw this up. And listeners,
you don't screw it up either.
Yeah, you don't screw it up either. You keep listening to us. You keep subscribing. You keep giving us feedback. We really appreciate it. We're very excited because on our, I guess depending on the time of this, we'll either have launched it already or we'll soon to have launched the new website.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
No, that's exciting.
It's exciting.
It's either going to be on the way or available
not
right now. Yeah. This is what we get for recording a podcast in advance.
We're trying to get ahead of the game a little bit. And now I'm not sure when this is going to be released as opposed to when the new website launches. But you should go to www.electionu.com and check it out. And if it isn't up and running in a new, shiny new capacity, then it shall be shortly.
Bookmark it. And then just refresh it obsessively.
Exactly.
It'll be there.
But what you can do right now, if you're looking for something to do, is definitely subscribe via iTunes or Google Podcasts. That helps us in the searches. So people who type in running for office or want information on how to run for office, our podcast, our free service will pop up for them. And so subscriptions really help with the algorithms that they use to do for searches and stuff. So please subscribe. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a review or a rating, we would really love it. We are always welcome. We are always welcoming those comments, and we love, love, love the feedback. Yeah, I think like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter as well. All the places. We're even on Snapchat, like all the kids are doing these days. I'm really bad at Snapchatting, but we're old people who don't really understand Snapchat. I do not understand it. You are way better at it than I am. Thanks. Yeah. Maybe you should take over. You should take over the election you Snapchat since maybe I should. Yeah. Since I have to put 2 hamsters on a wheel to try to get it to work. It's not quite working for me. Anyway. Listeners. Just some work planning on the mic here. Yeah. Doing a little business development. Listeners, thank you again so much. Until next week, I'm Jason Bennett signing off. I'm Rainey Cohen. Thanks again. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye. Bye. Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.